Hi everyone, Rob Chandler here, Starting Pixel. Today we're joined by Scot Barber, who's awesome and has decided to join us and talk to us about awesome things, which is always great. So welcome, Scot. Hope you're well.
Thanks for having me, Rob. I am doing well over here. I hope you are as
Yeah.
well.
Oh yeah, totally. Well, other than the fact that the technology was collapsing around my and up in flames, why does it always happen literally the 2 minutes before? It's predictable. It's actually predictable that it's all going to collapse. Luckily, I've got the trusty Macintosh, as I said, my MacBook Air came to the rescue. Hurrah! These PCs and stuff. So with these things, as you know, sort of Starting Pixel, we talk about all sorts of technology to do with the innovations that happening in content production. So it's not just film or TV, it's like any sort of production. And we've got you on as guest, which is brilliant. So maybe explain a little bit about who you are, first of all.
Yeah, who
Bit of
is this guy
background.
on the show?
How did, yeah, what's you doing it? And maybe a little bit about your journey, because I say it's very interesting.
Yeah, I think it's something you can't script. I come from the San Francisco Bay Area originally, went to San Francisco State for writing, directing film. In college, I started a documentary shooting 16 millimeter, on an ACL Eclair to a Sony professional Walkman, recording dialogue on one of the tracks of a cassette, 60 hertz on the other. And yeah, I won't go into all the tech, but it was challenging back then. And I ended up working with an early software called Film Logic. I was actually one of the first users, actually the first user on Windows for that. I was on a PC at the time, and that ultimately got acquired by Apple, became Cinema Tools, and I kind of got launched off from there. A couple of years contracting with Apple in helping to develop Cinema Tools for film, and then I went on to the original Final Cut Pro team for the next 8 years, strategic market development worldwide. Yeah, and then from there off, created the first virtual production stage in Hollywood called
Right.
Oasis Imagery. We could unpack all this later, but then ultimately Sony Pictures there for another nearly a decade as vice president of production technology. Outside of that, back to directing music videos and digital humans at Hyperreal, and then now at VOIA doing virtual production, software development kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
been a little
That's
bit of a
like,
whirlwind.
right? It's great when you sort of get on that escalator going to those places, right? And it's sort of you end up in the have the most amazing story. So when did you graduate? When were you at Apple? Was that the
Would have been
90s?
97, 98. I graduated out of San
Right.
Francisco State. Yeah, and then my film didn't get, it took me 10 years to make that documentary, and then another 10 for it to come out. It came out in 2010, thanks to Universal Pictures.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. So okay, so it was just as my experience of would have been at Apple. So I used to be in print, and then I got into a company called Scion, which was like the precursor to, I guess it was precursor to the iPhone. I know a bunch of people who ended up leaving it when the bubble burst and ended up going to Apple to help develop, the original Touch. And then but the Touch came along probably 3 or 4 years after you were at Apple, I suppose. Must have been right. Sort of
Yeah, I
there
mean,
was that pivot.
what an amazing time to be at Apple. I mean, it was incredible, 2000 to 2009.
Right.
And during that time, we launched iTunes, the retail stores, the iPod, the iPhone, Final Cut Pro, and the whole suite. I mean, it was amazing what was going on at the time. The innovation was incredible,
Right.
nonstop, just surrounded by brilliant minds. It was a blast.
Yeah, no, I bet it must have been. Because and all those things you sort of everyone takes for granted now, but at some point they hadn't been launched, and then there's like the next day it's like this thing's out, and then there was another thing. I was at Microsoft from I don't know in the sort of mid 90s, and that was you had people queuing up outside the doors just to get an operating system. I mean, it's mad. It's sort of madness when you think about it now, right? It's like
Yeah,
I,
I had an early start on the Windows side as well. An older brother who was a MCSE for Microsoft and a gaming admin, online gamer guy, and he helped me to build my original PCs. You need to go buy 2 megs of RAM and a one megabyte hard drive and put it on this motherboard.
oh, yeah, and
So I was
then
building those.
yeah, 3.5-inch discs having to load in your sort of load up the operating system from the,
Yeah,
every morning kind of thing when you wanted to turn the thing on.
yeah. People won't know what we're talking about anymore.
Nah,
Half this
nah.
audience, what are they saying?
Yeah. Actually, well, yeah, that's true. What's the, pair of old fossils kind of thing. So that's okay. So that was really interesting. What was your and you went to Sony. So did you? Because that was that you. So you were very product focused at Apple, but then sounds like you sort of then found film again.
Yeah, the funny thing is, I kind of always believed that I could be a better filmmaker if I knew all the components of a production, particularly initially editing might make me a better director, whereby
Got
I
you.
could see through the camera if I had the coverage I needed, which I think still stands true. It really
Yeah.
helps bring that shooting ratio down.
Right.
And I think, and it was very important to do that when you're shooting on film, way different than digital, and you could just blow through anything you want.
Yeah.
Film, you're $1,000, $1,000, $1,000 every time you hit that button. So it was important to me then. And that's kind of why I was in post production initially, or that's what kind of garnered my interest in doing that. And
Right.
Apple, again, was a fascinating place. So I was able to work with editors around the world and movie studios all over the world and filmmakers everywhere and just kind of learn from them at the same time as kind of teach a new emerging world, like allow more voices to be heard where, you had, this was the other component that turned me on about it, was that, you had an Avid, which cost $100,000
Right.
and I couldn't even get on one. I had to become an Avid certified tech, a place called Moviola, which is where Apple picked me up out of, to get to Avids at night. So I would set them up during the day for editors. And then I have to test them, make sure they work. So I'd bring them on hard drives and I'd cut my movie all right and then bring it back. Every editor was like, the Avid T sets are the best. They all work. All the keyboards are mapped. This is incredible because I was cutting on.
It's because you did it.
Yeah. So I felt that, Apple was providing a way for people like myself at the time who didn't have a lot of money to tell their stories. With Final Cut Pro, it just knocked that price down. And
Right.
I just kind of loved that. So it was a big learning experience for me. But I always loved film. So when they decided to go to Final Cut X in 2009, I decided I couldn't help them anymore. I was like, look, I'm not going to be additive to this new mission. I'm Final Cut 7, it's my last
Right.
one. And so I jumped back off at that point, and went back into filmmaking again and started a virtual production company early on, again called Oasis Imagery. And one of the big things I learned about that was that it's about the right team. That's what Apple really taught me. And not just Apple, but seeing all the production companies and entities that I was given access to by way of working at Apple, I realized the team was really important. So
Right.
I formed a killer team. One of the guys now is one of Apple's leading systems engineers. He handles everything behind Marcom and huge facilities of petabytes of storage and data transmitting. And then the other gentleman there became one of the lead architects at NVIDIA. So he was building GPUs for us, and the other guy was my CTO. We had a crushing team. We were just way too early, doing virtual production.
So what was it? So what is it? Sometimes I ask guests actually what I ask them in as few words as possible to describe or explain virtual production. But actually, what comes to mind with yourself and your experience is what has that explanation of virtual production changed from when you used that phrase, which was in around the turn of the tens,
2010,
right?
2012, yeah, right in there.
So that's 15 years ago. So what's changed from that bit, if you were to describe it then versus describing it sort of a bit, now?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's going to change again as we go forward
Right.
with
Yeah,
AI.
yeah, absolutely.
I think anything I say now will be irrelevant soon.
Right.
I think, in my mind at the time I saw, because having been a gamer as well, I saw a way that video games were going to meet with filmmaking. Just something there told me that these are going to collide someday. So virtual production to me at the time was twofold. One, it was fiction, a lot of Previz tools today. And the second component of it was real-time compositing, where, the gentleman I mentioned on my team was named Don Britton. He had a company called Instant Effects at the time. And so I partnered up with him. They were building GPUs and coding all that stuff. And again, he went on to NVIDIA. Determined that could we do this real-time compositing? Can we take what we're doing in post, but do it right in front of the camera? So that, to me, those two components, previs and real-time comp, were virtual production.
And when you say real-time comp, that's chroma keying.
Yeah, at the time it was chroma keying and in stereo. So we had 3D rigs on our stage. Everything we did was 3D at the time. Some beam splitter rigs on the stage with SDI feeds into the GPU system out into
Right.
our theater where we can composite in. I don't know, I think we did like a spinning watch and I stuck my hand through it and it shrunk onto my wrist and just crazy things like that to showcase what it could do,
Right.
mainly for like the West Side commercial people who could never get into Hollywood. They would never come over, you know, to into Hollywood to do anything. We're always on the short form West Side, and we were starting to bring them over because of interest. You know, ended up doing like Coke commercials and
Right.
Mustang commercials and just cool little short format things.
They're a lot more forgiving. That's the thing I think about the short form ads, right? You can be a bit more creative with them, but they're also hellishly forgiving.
Yeah,
You know, it's
totally.
90 seconds, 60 seconds,
You,
30 seconds, right?
You're allowed to experiment more, I think, and we were definitely experimenting. Again, yes, it was all chroma key and green screen compositing in the GPU there in real time. That, yeah, everything was an experiment. So they were okay with that. The feature film is not gonna let you experiment very
No,
much.
absolutely. Again, it's all still experimenting. I think that's one of the really thing that I get excited about is that I'm still making it up as I go along. I mean, and I've only been doing it for 5 years. You know, I've worked. This has got nothing to do with me, my previous life at all. I was just a marketing person at, you know, the big tech companies. So this is all sort of new, but it's just fascinating how quickly it's moving and, you know, the bits that are changing. And it's like I said, you know, that the whole system collapsed in front of me while I was just trying to get it up and running, right? That's what you got to do, right? You got to break it to work and
Totally.
make it out, right?
If nothing else, you're gonna learn another way it won't work.
Right. Brilliant. That might have to go on a t-shirt. I might quote you on that. I might actually stick that in some presentations that I do now. Yeah, that's so you did all of that, and then you went to Sony. What was Sony?
Yeah,
Explain a
so
bit more
look,
about that.
I learned so at Oasis, you know, which kind of I'm rolling back a little bit to get me to Sony, but there I was again doing a lot of 3D.
Right.
And we hosted the first 3D film festival in Hollywood and supported a number of films worldwide. And we're doing 3D conversions from 2D and anything we could do to help the new medium because I believed at the time it was quite immersive and virtual production. Now, my understanding now is also immersion. I've added
Right.
that to the list of what kind of one of the constituent components of virtual production today is the immersion element that you don't quite get out of a flat 2D image. So 3D was big and Sony was making 3D televisions and
Right.
they needed to boost those and they needed people that understood how to shoot for those. And
Right.
so I got picked up by them quickly and I went on to help host some of this on stage 7 on the Sony Pictures lot. They were running a program for Local 600 and the Directors Guild and other productions that came through to sort of teach them what stereography kind of meant and how to
Right.
utilize that in a production and what makes sense and what didn't. They hired me on to kind of help out with that. So I came in and was kind of teaching some 3D classes, mostly working with cinematographers. I was leaning that way. I was a DP whisperer at the time.
Right.
No, send him to the DPs. He gets along
Yeah,
with
you
us.
should.
So you know, for me, I think the thing that made me successful initially at Sony Pictures in doing that was a unique understanding of 3D that wasn't necessarily being taught in the class, which was what I kind of understood. Where you know, a cinematographer's job is to create depth and volume to carve that out of a flat image, right? Using light. That's what they
Yeah.
do. You know, they sculpt a face or a scene or a scenario or a bit of action or emotion, whatever it is they're trying to do. They sculpt it with light out of it onto a flat surface, but give it that depth. And my principle was that if the stereo wasn't playing in concert with that, it was bogus, right?
Right.
So if the depth cues of 3D didn't match the light cues that the cinematographer had set up, it wasn't something we needed to do or wanted to do. And I think that's why I got on with DPs well, because I would look at a scene and understand what they had done with it, and then throttle that stereographer into that pocket with them rather than just have these two mindsets, you know, battling it out a lot, which is, you can tell it just doesn't look right. And, you know,
Yeah.
Cameron does it well. There's very few others that do in my mind. So
It's a really
that kind of
Yeah.
got me the first successes at.
Got you. Got you. And must have been quite young as well, right? So you were sort of, I'm trying to do the maths in my mind, I mean, my head actually. And
I was,
you've
yeah,
had, it sounds like you've had three careers by the time that you're
I've
like
had
in your mid 30s, right?
I'm part cat, part cat.
Right.
I'm 50. I'm in my 50s now, early 50s. So I was, yeah, just about 30 then.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty, yeah. Yeah. I mean, the golden age as well, right? Being able to do that kind of stuff at that age.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was, maybe I was 40, 2010, yeah, 35. Yeah, I think I did have a lot of lives. I was actually a locksmith for many years
Right.
to get me through college.
Nothing wrong with that. You got to hustle, right? You got to hustle.
Yeah.
Um, cool. Let me get the. So you went to Apple, and then you had your own thing, and then it was Sony. Is that right?
Yeah, so yeah, it was Oasis Imagery, then Sony Pictures, and that I had several kind of paths inside of Sony. So I initially started in 3D, and then that 3D kind of waned, at least the course ran its course, so to speak. But I stayed on the stage 7 working with the ASC at the time, and again with DPs. And then Sony Electronics, who was developing new cameras, the F55, the F65, the Venice, and even the Alpha series, the A7s, things like that would come through. So I was leaning a little bit more toward camera design and how to, I called it playing sensor sommelier for DPs, like how to pair
Right.
a sensor with a lens.
Got you.
Because if you put a Leica Similux C on an F65, it's sharp, 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 But if you wear that same glass on an Arri, Alexa, it just looks beautiful. So I was working with DPs in pre-production, just pairing things and teaching Sony Electronics, I think, just a different paradigm where, when I started working with them, they have a camera for everyone, by the way, right? You can have an action cam all the way up to
Right.
a cinema camera. The issue that I had with that was that coming out of Apple, there was no cohesive ecosystem wrapping them together. You had a different GUI in every camera, different
Right.
button placement in every camera, codec in every camera, different menu structure. It's almost like every camera was made by a different manufacturer.
It probably was, right? That's the
Yeah, no, well, it's
right.
all Sony, but units within there,
Yeah.
Yeah, in silos. That's when I finally understood what divisions in a corporation were. It's like,
Right.
oh, it's truly divided. I felt like I had a message to help, you know, Sony Corporation just kind of wheel that in, and over a few years we ultimately did, right? You'll see that the ecosystem is a lot smoother now, starting with just codecs and things, and so that that went on for probably a couple years on the same stage, and at the same time I was also helping all of the productions from television game shows, Wheel of Fortune, Jeopardy, move over to 4K, or scripted, unscripted, chase, talent from the world's amazing race in with an Ozo camera up into Bali, or
Right.
on a set for Columbia Pictures, scanning Spider-Man's plane for marketing material later because they don't want to rebuild it. Just a lot of things that were novel ideas, using advanced technology to kind of capture components to virtually fold and hold those and reutilize them later in other ways. That was where my head was at. And after a couple more years of that, that led to one of my colleagues and I, Masaki Nakayama, we founded our own company inside of Sony. It's just crazy. Who does that?
So actually inside of Sony.
Within Sony, we founded Innovation Studios, incorporated it as its own entity, where we could actually work directly with engineering in Tokyo. We
Right.
wanted to work with their R&D departments directly to kind of get ahead of the curve and help develop some of those products into meaningful production tools for pictures. So it was that, again, that kind of became super cool again to me. They have this event called STEF in November every year in Tokyo, and it's the whole Tokyo high-rise building divided into cubicles, every technology you can ever imagine in any domain, all on display
Right.
to showcase where they're headed. Medical things and drone stuff and robot stuff and just things you never heard of all over. And I would go in there with like a list, saw everything. I'm like, that one,
That one.
this one, this one, floor 17, aisle 22, Q6, sort of make this list of technologies we kind of wanted to bring back onto our stage and test with, and make and break them. And let's put that time of flight sensor next to that, infrared sensing device, and just, try to create models for usable production tools, and that was way ahead. I mean, nobody was using the tools we were creating at the time because virtual production kind of hadn't taken off yet.
Right.
But some of the things we were showing were promising. Synchronizing sensors for shooting, 120 frames per second. One half of that shutter sees something, the other half sees something
Right.
else. Or, ultimately led into productions. And they were like, can we do that on this movie? Because it wasn't a test anymore. We had proven it. Again, features
Right.
won't let you test. So we decided to kind of test it. That was the beginning of Innovation Studios.
And how did you introduce those technologies, those innovations actually, because and proven, so you've proven them, and then how did that sort of get by osmosis into, how did people understand it? Because I think that's one of the big challenges generally with new tech coming into sort of anything, but especially a traditional place where there's big risks involved. If you, great adage from my world was, no one ever got sacked for choosing Microsoft, right? It used to be IBM, it was then Microsoft. And it's the same thing, right? Everyone's after their next job. No one's going to use a new tech. If it falls over, everyone's pointing at them.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I kind of wear two hats. Sometimes I'm super risk averse, and other times I'm not. So when I'm spending other people's money in production, I have to be very risk averse. And then when I'm testing and tinkering around, I just keep going and may blow up.
Right.
I think that the way we introduced it was, productions would come through, and Columbia Pictures would say, "I'm going to send a couple of productions through." Maybe they're working on Ghostbusters next or something. They just
Right.
kind of want to see what you have. So we would kind of showcase, here's some novel ideas that aren't ready for production, but think about it for the next one. Or I don't know, your timing of principle, but if it timed out, maybe if you're interested, we could work with ImageWorks or whoever to kind of develop a post pipeline for that.
Right.
So they would kind of preview what we had going on. They weren't only Sony Pictures; it could be anyone. Anyone came through there. Paramount, all the studios, and so we would show new ideas to them at the same time as perhaps solve some problems that they may be encountering. Like, how are we going to get this shot? We're thinking about doing this, that, and that's where my role would kind of come in, mostly in working with the productions, where I would kind of work with them on how to break down a shot or a VFX scene or something to help their VFX producer or stereographer, or whoever it might be, understand maybe another approach to getting the coverage without this one-off thing that was going to be so expensive.
Got you.
I think that those solutions are what garnered these productions trust in what we were showing them. And then ultimately they might come back 8 months later with a different film and go, we want to use that thing you showed me on this,
Got you. Got you. Yeah, I can see that. There's that sort of great phrase that I use a lot, which is showing people the art of the possible. And
Yeah.
that sort of stimulates the cogs as well, right? Just showing them what's, and
Yeah,
as you say, it's like 8 months later, they might go, oh, actually, that
yeah,
could
because
fit
I
here.
didn't have anything at stake. We weren't salespeople. We weren't trying to sell
Right.
anything to them. It was just trying to really help them. And my role was pretty unique. I was probably the only production person on as a studio employee. Like all of those are union people, typically not employees of the lot. And so I was a filmmaker who was also a studio exec. So
Right.
I would get deployed on the set with people because I understood that etiquette and how to be additive to those situations well,
Right.
and that just kind of became this organic, path for me to learn a lot. I mean, I think I learned more than I ever taught anyone out there. But again, another fascinating trajectory that just emboldened me to come up with ways to make it easier to accomplish. Kind of like the Final Cut hat back on. How
Right.
can we get more voices the opportunity? How can we provide an opportunity for them to do this? If I was back in college, how am I going to make this virtually
Right.
without hundreds of thousands of dollars?
And was it and what did a virtual production stage look like back then? Is it similar to what it does now, or is it quite
Yeah,
different?
what we had set up was a green screen. We had chroma, and we also had luma, white, black, and all that, but mostly
Right.
green. Real time comping that out with an Ultimate, Blackmagic Ultimate. But we also had some infrared lights behind the screen to do tracking without tape over the front. We just did infrared in the
Right.
back and then shot that with an IR camera that could see it. Remove the optical low pass, it sees the IR. We were the first entity to buy NCAMs, which is now owned by Zeiss.
Nice. Yeah.
NCAM used to only offer it as a service. You come out and you rent it from them. And I said, look, I need to buy them because I'm going to break them. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to pull the optical low pass filter off one of your lenses to see the infrared. And they're like, what? So we work closely with engineers on other manufacturers. So we have NCAMs on the bottom of Venice with Fujin on lenses, on Cabrio lenses on 1990s, and a green screen and an Ultimat. One of the virtual productions we did, you could see we scanned a Shark Tank set. Shark Tank, which was on the next stage 12, was losing their set for the exit interviews. So an entrepreneur gets a deal with Mark Cuban, comes out, hot off the set, in front of the camera. How do you feel about getting a deal with Mark Cuban? So that set was going to go away. And one of the producers was a friend of mine. And he said, can you do anything about it? I said, sure, man. So we went over, we scanned that set, and not in a traditional way. We were talking not a mesh in the end. It was a point cloud that we retained. Because we had also acquired a point cloud render company and brought that in and built a plugin for Unreal. As it gets deeper, built a plugin for Unreal Engine early on to do point clouds. Real time, photoreal, billions of points. And so it's a hyper real set. So they would run off the exit interview stage onto our green screen that was tracked in the Ultimat through Unreal Engine with our point cloud set behind them, full parallel, and shot that in real time as they came out. And that was the first virtual production stage.
When was this? When was this?
This is at Sony Pictures Stage 7 Innovation Studio. We won a Lumiere Award for that.
And whenabouts was it?
Oh, God, 2015, 16. Yeah.
So a good 10 years ago. I guess I didn't even know that the Ultimat existed then. Was that before? Because it existed before the Black Magic purchased it, right?
Yeah.
And I'm trying to remember the guy who invented it. He's going to come to my mind in a minute.
I love that box because you could do garbage mats and a whole bunch of different mask layers and keep them all tweaked, really cool. For real time, it's crazy.
Yeah. And the great thing, I mean, I use this phrase a lot, certainly when it's sort of talk about virtual production, is that one of the reasons actually why I got so excited about it when I first saw it 5 years ago, right? It's not the 30 years ago kind of thing. It's like, wow, this is amazing. And I knew that things get cheaper, faster, and easier to use, right? I mean, that's technology for you. And the most amazing thing is that you can get an Ultimat now for like $800.
Wow!
It's right. And it would have been what you'd have put at least a zero, if not more.
Yeah, exponential increase.
Right. It's incredible, and it's they're 4K now as well.
Yeah, different world. I think that that's kind of what led me to start to build systems for virtual production, where we were able to bulletproof a system there and then take that and start advancing it forward. How can we do this bigger, better? And that's kind of when we were one of the early adopters of utilizing Unreal Engine in that capacity. So that's when they started to kind of get behind us and going, wait, what are you doing on these stages with it? And how can we help you? And and so we, Kim and I are friends. And so we really, just kind of hunkered down with those guys. And we even knew the MetaHuman team way back when, because they were doing all the scanning for Sony PlayStation, who we worked with closely, their San Diego stages and their Santa Monica studios, all of their mocap and all their gaming technology of building models of people. I was privy to all that technology and worked directly with them because, again, I wanted to connect all the dots at Sony. Like, you have everything. You have the cameras and the lenses and the sensors and the projectors and the game engine and the studio and come on, and the music. We've got to get this together and crush it. And that was my goal.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, it's a really, really interesting ecosystem. Sony, I always think about, they're really, really good at creating those ecosystems for sure.
Yeah, I think the first time it all kind of came together was after Sony, though. So I was there till 2019. Again, I just saw, again, we had purchased a software company and folded that in the point cloud rendering. I had an idea of taking a game engine and plugging that onto it. It was the ultimate idea. PlayStation makes a game called Dreams, and this is public now, so
Okay.
you can check it out. They were at one time going to port that over to a PC, and there was an article that came out, and that was yours truly wanting to take off of PlayStation that one of the world's only point cloud engines. It's called Dreams. It's on your PlayStation box. You can make video games out of it and art out of it, do whatever you want. It only rendered in this impressionistic look, however. So I
Right.
thought, wow, if I had a photoreal point cloud rendering engine that I could plug onto a point cloud engine, game engine we already have, wow, what we would have. So that was the premise of all that, and that kind of just fell apart in the big corp of the whole, and it's
Right.
beyond me. At that point, I was like, okay, let me go do something else.
So,
So I
he's
decided to leave.
I so my first so I'm interested in the point cloud. So the audience, I'll explain my understanding what a point cloud is, and then you can say that's ridiculous, Rob. No, there's nothing like that at all. So my understanding of it is, when I was at Microsoft, they developed a point cloud system. I think it was called Red Dragon or something like that, and it basically you took a bunch of 2D pictures, and then you uploaded these 2D pictures, and it worked out, and this was back in 2011 or 12, and it worked out the intersection of where these 2D, and you could take a picture of it. Like, I think the famous one was a boxer, and they took all these pictures of this boxer, and all of these 2D pictures all intersected with each other because it was like this some tesseracty weird thing, and then it removed all these 2D planes, and you were left with this sort of ghost where these gazillion dots which were colored as well, so it looked like that
Yeah.
person effectively, all made out of these almost pixels floating in air. Is that sort of
Yeah.
about right?
Yeah, that's the little leaning photogrammetry is kind of the underlying principle of what you're describing there. And typically in any photogrammetry pipe, a point cloud is one of the processing pipes, right?
Right.
You'll get that deliverable, then turn it into a mesh. So yeah, that is a point cloud as a result. And the process you describe is photogrammetry. So I think that what we weren't using photogrammetry to create the point clouds, we're using scanning. So we do a LiDAR
Right.
scanner of a set and gather billions of points and then put them together. So there was no initial 2D pass other
Right.
than textures and exposure. So we would have a DSLR and a nodal and point up, down, and all of the cardinal positions, bracketed exposures, and then use that to texture each one, reproject on all the points in space.
Right.
That's how we created those, and then render that. Today, it's almost like where Gaussian splats are, right? They're very
Right.
similar to 2D planes that are point clouds rather
Yeah.
than a mesh that kind of form a 3D model from a given position,
Yeah.
It's very similar to that. So when I left, I was doing scanning and things like that. 2019, everything kind of came together when I got to Hyperreal, which is when I landed next. We were doing digital humans and digital human performance. We got nominated for an Emmy for the one I did over
Oh,
there.
nice.
Biggie, we did a live concert for the Meta headset, and for YouTube, I think it's still available out there. The better version is on the headset because then you could be immersed and all. But that was kind of where everything kind of came together, where we were I was on the physical production side, so I did all the mocap, all the facial performance capture on the front end, and then on the back end, shot everything on the LED volume and composited all the people together in post, and then handed that over to editorial. We shot on a LED volume, so that's where virtual production kind of took its next turn, right?
Right.
Into volumetric stages, LED volumes.
Yeah.
That the first iterations of those were just LED volumes, and 2.5 pitch or whatever.
Right.
We shot on there for the Biggie project, real live action people for a band. Every one of them separately, by the way. Just
Right.
because bands are hard to wrangle, man.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
working with filmmakers is one thing, working with bands is another, and somehow I love working with bands. But I don't know why. Maybe it's the chaos. But we couldn't get all the members of, like, the drummer separate from the bass player separate from the
Right.
keyboard.
Not
So I
talking.
had a click track going, and then I had to put a green screen comp inside of the LEDs, paint out green, leave the virtual environment everywhere except for
Got you.
behind them. Shoot that performance, then click track the next person, shoot that, and then comp them all together so you can't tell. Put Biggie into it virtually. It was wild. It was worthy of a nomination for sure.
God, wow.
That was a heavy lift, but I think that's the first time everything was starting to come together. And I thought
Right.
it started to really redefine what virtual production meant to me, different than what The Mandalorian was doing in the sense that the Mando team had to do it because they had reflection. It was almost like a car process TV show,
Right.
You need all those reflections going on in the car, so you shoot those on an LED volume and get it all
Yeah.
real time. His suit kind of was beholden to that kind of a approach. At least that's my understanding of it, and I felt that we weren't limited by that. It wasn't, we weren't doing it because of that. We were doing it because we had someone who wasn't with us anymore, and we wanted them to be real and provide his legacy a worthy project for him and his estate, and something that looked great and sounded great. So it was we were doing it about sound and visuals and integrations of constituent components that kind of come from different, again, even the band was a separate entity in itself, right? So all these elements were completely separated, and I just really enjoyed putting them all together for the first time. I think that was a catharsis for me.
And that was just before the pandemic, which was
It was,
really
and then it all went to shit. So
yeah. That's all
I don't know.
right.
I'm
Well,
sorry, audience. I dropped the next
well,
one.
they don't mind. Trust me. They at that stage, then there was this massive shift towards this technology that allowed you to film anywhere in a controlled environment, right?
Yeah, I loved LED volumes and I still enjoy them. For me, they're just, they're no technology backing up. No technology is a magic bullet for every shot,
Right.
right? Nothing.
Right.
And if somebody comes up with it, then they may as well say they've got the theory of everything to merge, quantum mechanics with relativity, because
Yeah.
I don't know how to do it. I've been trying for 30 years. So I think there's always a situation. Every film is different. Every production is different. So there's always these outlying things that you just aren't going to be aware of, and no tech can do it. I felt like LED volume was a heavy lift for given scenarios. In my mind, I come from like, hey, let's virtually fold and hold these things. If it's going to be reutilized, if you were going to do an episodic and come back to that environment again and again and again, that starts to make sense to me for an LED volume, where
Right.
I don't need a warehouse and all this to hold it for 12 months and bring it all back up and down. I could just light it up on a stage and turn it off the next day. So it could allow for uh, episodic productions
Right.
to save a lot of money and time and get more episodes out, start cranking out more content, actually ultimately providing more jobs, So I felt that that's where it sat for me. But at the same time, I'm always wanting to kind of break things. As soon as I think my mindset is, you got a beachhead, right? The first beachhead we all see, and you get to that and you go, okay. And some of us venture out to see the next one, but you're only seeing the horizon from those. My world is every time I hit a beachhead, I'm climbing to the highest mountain to I need to see a point of view. I need line of
Right.
sight into what I could do next versus just this horizon. I need details, And so when I looked at LED volume in that sense, I thought, how could I diversify this and democratize this? How can I get this down onto a phone?
Right.
Literally is that led to VOIA, where I
Okay,
am
yeah,
now.
well, tell us about VOIA, because so I think I can't remember how I sort of came in contact with the team actually. I think I saw something online and then reached out randomly about it, and then sort of had a chat with the um the guys. It was
Probably a
the
Dan or somebody. Yeah.
yeah, introduce us to you. Tell us a little bit about that. Actually,
Yeah.
tell us what it is first, maybe, and then tell us how you got into it and what you've been up to.
So VOIA is a iPhone application available now in the Apple Store that allows you to take an iPhone, probably 12 Pro and better. You just look at the white paper. I think it's at least a 12 Pro for the cameras on it. And it allows you to film a physical person in physical space, in any physical space. And it will, in real time, composite them out. So cut them out of that
Right.
space place them in a 3D environment that there's a host of provided environments we have on there people can try,
Right.
or they can bring in their own environment. It will place that person in space, track your camera, track your subject, track the environment, relight that person for the environment you place them in, and deliver either a final render or all the constituent components of that, with
Right.
being, every layer you want. So unpack
Simple.
that a little bit. Get it? Okay, shows
On
up.
an iPhone.
So yeah. And I'm an Apple guy. I work on a
Yeah.
PC. I'm not saying anything about it. All my Unreal work is done on PC, but
Right.
it's in my
Absolutely,
blood.
I'm a massive Apple fan. Yeah, for absolute. I ended up with Microsoft because I worked for them for 5 years. And I love it. I love it. But something about Apple,
Every tool has its own thing. So
right?
the premise, I'd come out of Sony wanting to get back to my roots of short form, production stuff. So I directed some music video. I did a Duran Duran music video. I directed Sabrina
Nice.
Carpenter's, after she came off of Coachella, we did a 3D concert of that performance for Meta and a
Yes.
headset, which I like that headset way better than the one we had to do, the Meta Quest 3, Quest 2. Anyways, I like that one a lot better. And so I was doing some of that, and um, I ran into Avner, former colleague of mine at Sony Pictures, called me and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" I was like, "I'm just shooting music
Hang on.
videos and doing kind of what I want, just figuring out what I want to do next." I wrote a book during COVID. It doesn't stop. So
Right. Tim, I know.
so
I know.
I know
I know.
I can tell by our
I
response,
know. Absolutely no.
You
Doesn't
don't get
stop.
into this unless you're.
Right.
Yeah.
Doesn't stop.
If you don't have it now, audience, it's going to turn you into it.
Yeah.
So I ran into Avner, who's the CEO. We met over at USC for a lunch, which is a great campus. Love it there. And I worked at ICT a bunch because they have light gauge scanners and things like that
Nice.
we'd been working with for a while, doing volumetric video things at Sony. We had a volumetric cage. I mean, I didn't go into everything we did there, but we had a lot. And working with universities as well, USC to the University of Heidelberg.
Right.
We sat down at lunch, Abner and I, and he had come off of selling software to him and Haim, his partner, for IBM, and to and I can't remember who else, Twitter. Like they were hardcore engineers building,
Right.
moving bits around in crazy ways, for people. And they wanted to do something fun.
Right.
They love movies. Abner always says he loves Star Wars, which you can't go wrong with Star Wars
Right.
unless you go to episode 4. But I
Let's not do
digress.
it. Let's not do it.
Yeah, sorry.
Right. Yeah.
Yes,
Cool.
we just hit it off on the love of movies, and I said, look, I've always wanted to take. I'm a big proponent of empowering other voices and in filmmaking, and I want to put some tools in their hands. And I thought of a way maybe we could use a phone. It's got all the pieces there. If we could super res some of those pieces in that AR kit, we might be able to get better tracking and better comping. And right then, AI was kind of just hitting my horizons. And I was trying to find line of sight.
Right.
And line of sight was super resolution to me. How do we super res? I was using Topaz to do video style, up-res my 16
Right.
millimeter film that I had shot during COVID. I up-res that to 4K and re-released it. So I was used to what some of these new AI pixel pushing tools were. And I had done some novel approaches at Sony using like their autofocus system to generate depth in a scene, like
Right.
crazy idea. Well, isn't it seeing the depth by way of the focus? Or what can I take that out into a depth map and just a different approach, And I was getting line of sight and I didn't have the engineering team and I felt maybe I just met them.
Right.
And so off we ran. This is like 3.5 years ago. We decided that one of the dogmas was we want to keep people. Like I don't want to virtualize people anymore. I was okay
Right.
virtualizing Biggie because he's no longer with us.
Right.
And in those situations, again, what can you do, But if they're here with us now, then we're going to use them. I want actors in front because everything I learned from filmmakers at Sony or in my time at Sony Pictures was that directors work with talent. There's this organic thing going
Right.
on, man. It's just, they might just change their lighting or their tones or anything just in a moment. They're they're constantly evolving from what's on that page.
Yeah.
And you just can't take that away and go, hey, you're going to do that post. To just stand there and look at that tennis ball.
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting thing that happened to me 7, 8 weeks ago. I was doing a session at an event called the VP Gathering in Breda in the Netherlands. And Wolfie was there. I'm trying to think of his surname. You probably know him. And it really a penny super dropped on me, which was the mentality difference between an engineer and a creative. And it's like you can't force these two. These are opposing forces, man. And VP is very much this engineering solution, code and so moving bits around and stuff like that. But a director wants to change his mind or her mind because it's not working. It's not working. I need to change my mind, and we've got to do it something different. Cinematographer needs to really light it. You've got to do something different. This isn't working, and it was a real interesting It was an interesting moment for me to realize that it was a difference between a paintbrush and the artist kind of scenario as well.
Yeah, yeah, it is kind of two mindsets, really. One is like problems, trying to find the solution to it, and the other is trying to define the problem. An engineer is trying to define the problem, and the creative just wants the solution. They don't have time. Don't find the problem. Give me another answer. So I think engineers are pivoting from a spot in a different way that a director might make a pivot, but they fly to another spot. They move off of ground truth and into something
Right,
else. An engineer has to stay in ground truth, or everything's at risk. What are
right.
they? You have to go from some, right? They're like AI. AI has to have a ground truth to have an understanding of where to go. If you just let it fly off like a director, it hallucinates, right? It just goes off and
Yeah,
creates crazy stuff. Another arm or something, like that's the same principle, really. It's
right,
trying to be creative but live in an engineering mindset like you described. And I think you kind of have to wear both of those hats a little, or
right.
at least speak both of those languages in virtual
Yeah.
production to kind of guide engineering into maybe a more responsive role on the set.
Yeah, 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 exactly. So it's a forgiving one as well. We were laughing actually. It was at the same time about you can see the frustration in an engineer or a technician's mind when it's not perfect or it's not the coordinates that it should be. It's like I just need the camera to look at this. That's what I want. Whereas they're sort of going, yeah, but technically it's not right. That angle can't work. But the director's going, yeah, but I want that. That's what I want.
So,
Right. And it's like I'm happy, but I'm
yeah, exactly.
but it's
So
like this.
this is our new angle.
Yeah, exactly. It's not, but you can sort of see this pent up frustration, but it's not technically right.
Yeah, and so where we are with Voya is like in that we're in the mix of that. So we started, again, like let's keep the human, let's keep the lens, right? Real lens and a real human in front. And now you're not just stuck on an iPhone. You could shoot everything on iPhone or attach that to any other camera you want,
Right.
Venice or Red or whatever, and we could use the video from that and all the tracking and all the tech from the iPhone and put the two together. So depends on what world you want to be in. Point and shoot and do it yourself, great. Or no, I'm cinema and I just want to use you for instead of having to have a constellation in the room with a
Right.
IR Sputnik or camera looking at that, or a NCAM tracking system, or any one of those systems just goes away. You don't really need all that in most situations. So that was huge to me. Uh, there were so many points of failure. Typically on a huge set, on a bigger set, let's talk motion picture, camera tracking system for, performance capture as well. You have a person, an actor in a bodysuit, with dots all over them, infrared. You have multiple cameras, up to like 120 cameras, let's say, all the way
Right.
around, looking at the subject from any given angle. Then on your camera, you have a telemetry device. So it has little dots all over it, and it can see where it is in space by other
Right.
points. So you get the extrinsics of where this thing is in space, all of its telemetry, which are two totally different systems. The body tracking of the person, another system. The facial performance system,
Right.
another system. Then the intrinsics of the camera, the focus, iris, zoom, lensing, all that is another layer, a totally different system. And then you want to throw an LED volume into that, and now you've got that system, which has implications of how you can set focus depth and all kinds of things,
Yeah.
lighting and color processing down the pipeline, which is massive impact on multiple systems. And I thought, wow, I got to make this easier.
Right. Right.
So we were able to do it by way of a fantastic team again of engineering as well as AI. And AI is really what's going to help push it exponentially into the future. So before on set, you say in a system like I just described, there's a lot of pre-production, like heavy pre-production,
Yeah.
weeks and weeks and weeks, if not months, to get all those components to come together. Then there's the day of set, like one day, or 2 days. Then there's like months of post-production, beginning with sensor fusion and data fusion of all of those components, and then those into constituent layers that you're going to then composite somehow and send down another pipe. How do you distill each one of these phases, into something that's easy to accomplish on a device? And it's never going to be everything in every situation, but it could be a lot. So at the time, it was all manual. Everything was manual. Every one of those phases was manual.
Yeah.
Manually set it up, manually do all of the fusion, data fusion, sensor fusion, manually do all the compositing. And what AI has provided us, at least, is we can do 80% of the work and let it do the last 20%,
20.
which is,
Right.
or sometimes in other situations, it does the first 80% and we polish the last 20.
Right.
So if we're pixel pushing like on a screen, we'll do that last 20% in compositing or light wrapping or whatever we're trying to do to like sell that image as real. We might finesse that with artistry, whereby AI did everything in front of it. And on one level of VOIA, like on the output render side, if somebody brought their own environment to us and wanted to put people in it, we would finesse the last bit for them.
Got you.
If you're point and shoot, then we already did. If you're just going to use the phone and go shoot and let it do it, then we already built the first 80% by automating an AI and all of that.
Got
And
you.
the last 20% is just what's in when you hit go on the phone, AI is going to just take what you shot and comp it, So there's two levels of kind of what we do and how we approach our position in it. But I think that AI ultimately, as it progressive, in a not a linear way, but in a logarithmic curve, like the next day it could just
Totally.
be 10 times better. It'll ultimately take over 100% of what we're having to do on either side, and that's the goal.
Cool. So let me play that back slightly to you, just so I can get my head round it as well. So at the beginning of your career, when you first started, you were using, well, actually, it wasn't when you first started. There was a thing called an Ultimat, which is a keyer, and what that does is it looks at green, and anything it sees green, it turns into an alpha channel, which is transparency, effectively, right? It's like a PNG. You've sort of been doing that on a screen, and then camera tracking and
then add stereo to that first. Then,
that's right. Yeah. So you've got that going on. You've got green, and then there's a lot of post-production. If you weren't doing it real time, there was post-production, and then there was people wearing body suits with lots of little bobble balls on them, and then the cameras had these things. And these, when we laughed about, I think about the Ultimat now being $800 when it was probably $20,000. You're right, a lot of money, and there were like 4 in the country, kind of thing. And now all of that work, and the tracking systems. I mean, I think the Accent suit, I can't remember how much it was. We had one. That's a lot of money. I think the camera tracking systems, $20,000-$30,000. All that kind of LED wall for relatively, 7 meters by 7 meters, 6 figures. It's not a small amount of. Then the pre-production that you mentioned, there's a whole bunch of that kind of stuff. And now what you're doing is that you've got an iPhone and you've stuck it on front of the camera and it fixes it all, right? Is that right?
Yeah, that's pretty much the premise.
Cool. Okay. That sounds all right. What did I say? Things get cheaper, faster, and easier to use, right?
Yeah. I mean, look, it's just empowering. Imagine like a corporation, for instance, using their CEOs in London or somewhere, and they're shooting in LA. That CEO could literally just pick up the phone, stand it in front of themselves, shoot with our app, send that over back to LA or into the cloud to VOIA, and we can put them in anywhere you want. So, for airlines, different destinations or vacation places, it's a point and shoot. For podcasters, for anyone who can just sit in front of a camera wherever they want and put themselves anywhere they want and get a
Yeah.
damn good quality out of that, it's done. For people who want to do major things, like I want to attach this dual system now to an Alexa and shoot this car scene for a feature film, okay, great. Attach it to that camera and we'll deliver you the foreground separate, the background separate, the tracking, the depth map, the surface normal, the lit, the unlit, the virtual world track, the person track, all those layers, and you could composite it, you do whatever you want with it.
So here's the question. So we talked a bit earlier on about that when you were at Sony, convincing the line producers and directors and about new technology and its uses. And obviously for all the right reasons, they're quite hesitant about using sort of new technology. Now you're coming along and you're waving an iPhone and say, well, you can do it all with that. What are these hurdles that I guess you
Yeah,
must have come against them, right, already.
sure.
Otherwise we'd all be using it now.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
what's that?
Again, I think that the premise is that it's not going to be a magic bullet for everything, right? So it'll work in
Right.
some situations and not in others. You may have to augment it with other systems depending on what you're trying to do. I'm going underwater. Okay, well, this
Right.
might be an issue, right? Because AI doesn't understand underwater in an image, ripples and light and all just
Right.
totally different science. So there'll be situations where it doesn't quite work, or I wouldn't recommend it. The challenges right now have been, I'm in the mode of test. I think
Right.
if you're a point and shoot, you can use it today and I think safely go and you'd be fine. If we could use a Zoom and have a virtual background, you can certainly do this and look better,
Right.
and in 3D space, right? And it looked fantastic. I focus a little bit more on the higher end of it where all of these elements need to be, real time for a motion picture. And if we solve that, then it just makes all the other results better, right? Everything else
Right.
just is AI and it just renders better. The challenges have been, the biggest challenge I think is it's a new paradigm of shooting, Rob. It's a shifting paradigm of shooting. Say that 3 times fast. It's you're not quite on a green screen. You're not quite on an LED volume. You're kind of both. You're in a world where you're like on a green screen, you don't typically do dynamic lighting. You do a light for that shot and leave it. You don't move lights around a whole bunch because then your chroma key goes nuts back there. I
Right.
mean, you can, but it's tricky. You
Still,
don't
yeah,
typically
it's a
do
risk.
that. Yeah. And you might, if you want the subject lit by the environment, then you do an LED on because now they're lit by it. You
Right.
don't have to worry about it all. This kind of is a combo of both, right? You're going to shoot like you're on LED volume. So I would light the subject either totally flat and then just let the AI handle all the relighting.
Right.
Or but a director might come along, like we said, or a DP go flat. I'm trying to carve the face out. What do you mean? So they'll want to light that subject, right?
Right.
And when they light a subject, our challenge today is how do you make the environment react to what we
To
did on
what they're
set
doing. Right.
versus the inverse of that? Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's a big one,
Yeah.
So we're tackling that element right now, and I think it's just a different way of people how they
Well,
approach it.
it's that engineering versus that creativity scenario, right? It's like the engineering's been done and you're going to have it flat. Whereas the DOP's going, I don't want it flat. I want to do it the way I want to do it. You make your tech work for me. I'm
Yes.
the boss.
Yeah, so there's few elements similar to that we're approaching now to kind of you give us all the elements on all the parts and layers, but we need this, And so we're working on those again because it'll just serve everyone in the end. I think internally one of the challenges was convincing engineering that this could be one thing for everyone.
Right.
Initially they were like, hey, it's either for pro or it's not. I'm like, no, no, no. We could get both of these out of this. Everything the pro could do, you're going to automate, right? Well, everybody could use that.
Right.
So until it's automated, it doesn't trickle down into the just point and shoot world. But once it's automated, there it goes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's just the democratization of technology. It's just does a great job of that. What are you up to? What are you up to at the moment? What's your focus? You said you've written a book. Are you doing
Yeah, I wrote a
anything,
book.
interesting like that now?
Yeah, well, I could tell you a little bit. I could plug my thing. I did a film on a band
Totally.
called Mother Love Bone. I worked with bands called Soundgarden and Pearl Jam way back in the '90s. and was friends with them and made a film. My documentary is on the singer of Mother Love Bone, and when he passed, they got Eddie Vedder and became Pearl Jam. And so 10 years of working on that doc, I just had so much content. I thought I can only give you a idealized Facebook version of his life, in
Right.
a
Yeah.
movie. And
Yeah.
there's so much more to a human. So I wanted to write a book about it. I had enough material, but I just never had the time. I felt like COVID was like the universe looking down on me going, you've been talking about this for 9 years
Yeah.
now. So either you do it now or stop talking about it. So I just hunkered down and wrote that, and I just released it last year. So that was
Brilliant. Well,
cool.
that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's on Andrew Wood, and that one's called Man of Golden Words. manofgoldenwords.com. Anyways, nowadays I just did another music video, and I'm working with a couple of filmmakers. I was in New York recently with a wonderful filmmaker working on taking samples of, areas of New York brickwork and things that had existed way in the past to be able to de-age New York today. So it's this wild approach to be able to shoot on today's environment yet make it look like yesterday.
Make it
Yeah. So things like that, that's definitely not ready for prime time. It's going to
keep him
wait a
busy.
year or
Keep him
so.
busy. I think.
Yeah,
Yeah. Keep him busy.
totally.
Yeah.
How about you? How about yourself?
Still looking over that head. So as I said, it was like this mad ride for the last I don't know 6 weeks. I went to the Netherlands, and I've had a bit like yourself actually. I've had this thing in my head, this real thing where I when I first came across virtual production, which was just at the beginning of the lockdown, and I looked at it, and my naivety, um, with those three words of or three statements, it's going to get cheaper, faster, and easier to use, right? And I first saw it, and I thought, and I looked at it, and I thought, why would you film any other way? That couldn't work out. Now I know why, right? But there was that naivety, because it's a hell of a lot. It's more fun going doing stuff, and it's that has that creative vibe to it, and all those sides. I completely got that over time, but at the time it's like, why would you film any other way? This is magical. This is mad. Any environment, Mars, Jupiter, Paris apartment. You don't have to deal with a wall, because why would you film any other way? But it also didn't have. It really didn't feel like it had a home as well, and I had access to a green screen studio with three cameras that had motion tracking units on them. They're Moses tracking units. So I
Yeah,
had to
yeah,
learn filmmaking. I didn't have a clue about filmmaking. Didn't know what an ISO was. Didn't know anything. Didn't know what lenses were, nodal points. But then I had to understand broadcast technology, because actually that's the ultimate. That's from broadcast. And that's an engineering solution. So all of those sort of structures as well. Then, of course, as you said, there's LED walls. That comes from the live entertainment world, right? And that's a
yeah.
different type of structure. Then connecting them things together. And then we had an accent suit. So I then learned what that was all about as well. And my poor little brain was like, struggled with this thing. But I got there in the end, and that's why I started starting Pixel actually. But it still always sort of bugged me, and I could see that the world was also changing in the future. This is not a linear path of filmmaking and TV. There is a disruption sort of coming, and I could see that with YouTube's been around for a long time, but it's not been around for a long time. It's not been around as long as cinema has been around, but I could see it's sort of something is in the wash.
Mm.
So I sort of, it was bugging me, and I worked with a really great national radio presenter who came and tried some stuff. And then there was a writer who we did some things where we shot three cameras using vertical, because I was convinced that verticals, this is the format that people are watching it in. So we filmed some short comedy sketches using three cameras, because you can do that with green screen, right? It's all live. Like yourself, I was convinced that live comp is absolutely, it will get better. And I know if I spent 2 years learning how to pull a perfect key and how to light. So you couldn't tell the difference. And I sort of getting there, right? So I'm nearly there. I'm like, there's that like 5%, and I
I'm
still
still
couldn't work.
trying.
Right, yeah, exactly. So it's a place, and we shot this thing, in a pub, but it was a virtual pub, and then we did other bits and pieces. And then a year ago, I was just looking at podcasting, and it's like, okay, well, in my social feed, I'm starting to see a lot of video of just sound bites from podcasts, and going, okay, well, that's interesting. So they're filming it to promote the audio podcast. So then I thought, okay, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to film a podcast with using virtual production. Why not? And it worked. And it worked, right? But it was a big lift, and it was only 3 of us who did it, right? So it was 2 presenters. I was one of them. I had a sound engineer and me, the other engineer. So the poor, my very, very good friend, was trying to plug
We
in the audio
subject
and
our
get it all to work.
we
It's still my
subject our
friend.
friends to a lot.
Right, I know, absolutely, absolutely. So anyway, so we got it to work, and it did look great. I mean, if you and I and anyone in the sort of who's played the game, you could go, well, that's a CGI or Unreal Engine, but it for most people it wasn't. Anyway, so blah 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 blah, and then I thought, you know what, they're using it for promotional purposes at the moment, but this is going to be a thing, and this is the thing. And this is where I can sort of do the thing. So then I think, so I was in the Netherlands and I was talking to Chris Bouchard, who's just amazing VP supervisor. And he said, go to Dean Street. If you know Soho, there's Dean Street. It's right in the middle of Soho. And they gave me this space. And because I said to them, video podcasting is going to be enormous, not big, not just bigger than it slightly is. It's going to be absolutely huge. And in a relatively short, and this was only a few weeks ago, in a relatively short period of time, I've created a virtual production, although I don't like to call it that because it's too complicated. So I try and call it just digital video podcasting. We're still trying to work on it. And you saw a glimpse before it all crashed at the
I saw a
beginning
little pre-production.
yeah, exactly. You saw the previs, right? Before the machine. And I obviously plugged something in that's probably not quite the GPU got upset.
We never have in film. The rule is you never have pickup shots. You have additional photography.
It was like, oh my god. Anyway, so it's all black magic, all works. I said to a friend of mine, I feels like I'm pushing a bunch of chips across the table. This is there you go. That's it. And it doesn't feel like a gamble, because I know I have it absolutely convinced and belief that there are new formats that are evolving. To your point, this technology is enabling people who have got stories to tell their stories, and I absolutely
Rob,
fundamentally believe it.
And your story is fantastic. I think it's particularly for a channel like this, man, and an audience. You just said you got into it 5 years ago. You just scrapped this together in a couple of weeks. You've got some tech behind you. You've got a good understanding of what to do with it. That's a fantastic message. It's better than I've been in 30 years breaking things forever. But it leads to people just kind of getting off the chair or in the chair and doing
right.
And I think I'm excited to be on your show and see what you've done, man. This is super cool.
Oh,
I think you're spot on.
Thank you. I hope so, because I'm going to be very hungry in about 10 years time if I'm not. Oh yeah.
So
anyway.
how often do you do your podcast? How often do it work? I want to see this. Plug your podcast for me. Let's get a plug.
It's trying to be so you're number 18. So we've been doing it weekly. So I do try and do it weekly. There's been a few hiatus recently because of a couple of cancellations, and I've been trying to set it all up. If you watch last week's, so you can find it on YouTube, Starting Pixel, that was actually filmed just with a one wide with the 2 of us and Liv, who's an amazing VFX. He owns a company called, I'm going to get it, Groovy VFX. I'm going to get it wrong. So Jesus, she's going to have keep telling me off now. She's amazing. Right, I'm in trouble already. I definitely Groovy in that. Anyway, whatever.
They put it in the text.
I'll put it in there. I'll put it in there. Absolutely. Yeah, go watch it, because actually, someone came in today and said they'd seen it and they didn't realize it was shot in a green screen studio, right? And that's all you want to hear, right? When you do VFX, it's like, I didn't know that was VFX. It's like, that's all you need to hear.
Yes. Right? I don't know what did you do in that movie? Perfect.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, nothing. So it's interesting times, to say the least. And I'm in my 50s as well, and I jump out of bed because it's so exciting still. Right.
Nice.
Right. It's like, it's really, really cool.
You got to do what you love, man. I think, again, I mentioned it earlier. There's some things I loved about, working with technologies and working with people and teams and empowering voices. It's just, there's these things that, if they come together for you personally as well as professionally, there's just no better world, And I
Right.
think that's the beauty of empowering voices, because people don't know because they don't necessarily have an opportunity, so you provide them the opportunity, go, hey
Right.
man, go, use this. Like I'm working with Edan at VOIA at universities. I'm really excited about that, just to get some curriculum going for people to start
Right.
learning how to do this on their phone. Like, what do you need? Just bring your phone. Just bring your
Right.
phone. What? Yeah, you bring
Yeah.
that, we'll handle the rest.
And you know that once someone becomes native to it at that age, that's all they ever know. You don't need
Yeah.
to, it's not something, it's that they're not having to, it's lifelong learning. And one of the challenges I think for the industries at the moment is that you've got people who are very been in that traditional job and role, in the film world, and technology is coming in and it's a scary place. Part of this podcast is really to try and demystify the tech. I'm not too sure we did it today, but I
Sorry.
kind of know.
Sorry.
No, that's fine because it's one of the I get too excited. But that's part of it. Is it's a scary place for people who have worked all their lives in a workflow that really hasn't evolved, didn't have to evolve too much. Digital and video came along, but it was very much there. And there's a big disruption, right? And it's the delivery method just as much as things, if whatever AI is. Um,
Yeah. I
but
think
capitalism as well. All
with
right,
what
so
we're doing today at Voya, I think that the biggest point, I'd want to make is that the engineering and the creatives, as you've, heard a little bit about my pedigree, we've approached this from, professional angle. We
yeah,
didn't get into this yesterday, but we want you to be able to get into it tomorrow.
yeah,
Imagine a world where you just go on a website, voya.com, and you could set up your shots, pick your environments, just say, okay, I want, Europe, I want a Paris street, I want this. And those environments just load onto your phone. There they are. You
right,
just pick your phone up anywhere you are and point and film somebody in it. And in real time, you'll see a previs level comp of that person standing there. You can move your camera around, go around them. It'll do all the
right,
tracking you want. And then you hit render, and that
right,
shot goes back up into the cloud. You go to the website, or it'll be on your phone ultimately, but you can go on the website and see that render, do a short little edit of it. Oh, I want from here to here. In the next shot, I want from here to here, and it'll render all that out for you back to your phone in 4K
right,
or 1080. And you're on Mars, and you're tracking. You don't have to do any of the stuff that we just
right,
talked about.
right. It's interesting, is it? Yeah, you spend all your life learning all this stuff, and actually all of it's redundant now, right? But you have to accept it. There's no, but you can't really look back. You just have to get excited and roll with it. Scott, it's been
Yeah.
amazing. Thank you so
Thanks, Rob.
much. We're going to have to do a part two at some point
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Let's follow
talk
up in
some
a
more.
while. Yeah.
We'll definitely, yeah, we'll do. Yeah, hopefully the podcast studio will be
Yeah, as
working.
long as I got good reviews. If they're all
Right.
thumbs down, let's just pass up the
Yes,
next.
yeah, we'll go with it. No, they'll be fine. Absolutely. No, it'd be brilliant. But again, yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. It was
Appreciate it.
just
Thank
really,
you.
really great to talk to you.
Bye.
And yeah, take care. And yeah, it's going to be brilliant, right?
It's going to be great. I can't wait to watch it. See what I said.
All right. All right.
See you.
You take care. Cheers. Bye.